And please tell us, you are an author of a book, dramaturg, director, and I believe that's how we met. I met being cast in one, I met you being cast in one of your shows.
Yes, you did quite an extraordinary job of, I brought the sword, because I thought you might like to remember.
Yes, of course I'd like to remember.
You got to wield that on stage. Because we were working on the life and history of Margaret of Anjou, and you were her right-hand man, Lord Clifford, and it was really a wonderful experience because I had a very large troupe of actors for such an informal work, and everyone just went all in. And is Margaret of Anjou going to get a main stage showing? So it's nice to know that we had an impact. But your audience probably doesn't know what we're talking about here when I keep saying life and history of Margaret of Anjou.
Exactly. It's probably one of Shakespeare's least known plays.
Absolutely. In fact, it's 3 plays. They're usually referred to as parts 1, 2 and 3 of Henry VI. So of course the boy gets the title as usual, but this was a version where a very clever British academic called Elizabeth Schaeffer pulled out all the acting fun Margaret bits. Margaret was Henry's queen, and melded them together into one play that focused on her history.
Yes, I think at one point he describes her as having a tongue more poisonous than an adder's tooth.
I think for Margaret the most famous line is a tiger's heart wrapped in a woman's hide.
You've written a book about Shakespeare. It's called Shakespeare and the Shrew. Is that correct?
That's right. A shrew is a very old-fashioned word for a woman who makes too much noise, who keeps talking when people would like her to be quiet. And I think that Margaret is one, of course, but I think Shakespeare wrote a lot of shrew figures who are really fun characters who people still love to perform and love to engage with, and just looks at 12 different characters in Shakespeare who could all be called shrews, who I think are extremely fun theatrical characters because of that rather than in spite of it.
These characters were not played by women, were they, in the time?
They were played by little boys, really, by teenage boys. Women were performed on the public stage. There were no professional actresses in England. There were in other parts of Europe, and in court entertainments, noble women would often perform. But the actual commercial public theatre in London had no female performers, and so the apprentices had the job of performing the female parts because they were considered to be not quite men yet, so they would fill that liminal space, that strange blurry line.
Some of Shakespeare's terms that are, modernised. We use a lot of his idioms in speech these days. Outrageous fortune, the naked truth, things like that we don't even realise are Shakespeare's inventions.
But what you're saying about Shakespeare's influence, it's a momentum thing, really. Once someone has gained a certain level of importance culturally, it's a lot easier for them to maintain that position because people have already heard of these things and therefore they want to look at them more. Shakespeare wrote amazing stuff, but he was part of a larger system. I wish people knew about all the other extraordinary playwrights at the time, and it was a very collaborative enterprise too. It was a working theatre system. There really are no rules of that kind about how you animate and embody fantastical ideas that are vehicles for the bigger questions that we all like to keep talking about.
Intersectional art, I think, is really interesting. Do you know if Shakespeare gets translated? You mentioned the Lithuanian production. Was that in English or was that in Lithuanian?
No, it was in Lithuanian. He gets translated all over the world, and interestingly, Some of the places his work has ended up have really developed strong local cultures for that. I think India is a great example. They're particularly strong there. There was a gorgeous production of Twelfth Night that toured out here a handful of years back, where they had 6 different languages in it. I was lucky enough to be asked to edit Much Ado About Nothing, which really is one of my most beloved plays. So I did that for Arden Performance Edition. So the idea of it was specifically to do a version that was going to be useful for actors and useful for people who wanted to think of the play more in performance terms. So it's an incredibly fun project and a great privilege to be asked to do something like that. Familiar with Much Ado About Nothing, it's one of the most beautiful expressions of the idea of how do we know what real love is.